if we could just take a beat, Stephen,
Yep,
on
please.
talking about what builds trust. And this again, because I just said, let's get away from process and talk about people. So let's get back to process. It's my happy place. So trust is built on predictability and follow through, not on grand gestures. So you really have to pay attention to things like decision rights. What decisions does the board make? What decisions does the CEO make? What decisions does the CEO inform? And what decisions does the CEO want to have a vote on? And so keeping those aisles clear, where it's important not just for the CEO and the board relationship, but for the senior management team as well, to see what is happening, to see how decisions are made, and to see what those decision rights are, and to be very consistent about that. It doesn't mean you don't collaborate, you don't challenge, you don't do that oversight, but understand what the what the regulations are, and stick by them, because once you start to blur those, trust goes away.
Yeah, so maybe we'll come back to the report and say building a strong foundation of trust was that first theme. And one of the first elements in the report is exactly what Jane is talking about here of whether it's process-wise with the delegation of authority document. So maybe we should do a raise of hands of how many folks have redone their delegation of authority document in the last year. All right, and then keep your hands up. How many folks have actually sat down and had a conversation between the CEO and the board about what we mean by the elements that are in the delegation of authority document? Right? So there too is, it's written on a piece of paper, probably on a shelf somewhere in your archives, but is it a living document, and does everyone truly understand what we mean? Because that delegation of authority set of rules or guidelines can create misalignment, can create erosion of trust, as we've seen so many times, simply because not everyone might understand what the rules of the road might be.
And just to add to that, bad process can undo good intent immediately. So I'd just like to give an example. I was on a board that was not a well-functioning board. There was a lot of dysfunction. At the very end of a very long and fractious meeting, the CEO, we were at a U-shaped table, and the CEO and the lead director were seated next to each other at the short end, and all the board members across. The lead director said, "We haven't done our board evaluations yet, so we're going to go around the table, and can everybody tell what they think about everybody else?" So, of course, it was really awkward, and nobody spoke. And it was an opportunity that could have been used to build trust, and it just destroyed trust even more, because the conversation going out of the room is, "Can you believe that just happened?" Like, what were they thinking? So it was it was an example where the lead director was check the box and not really thinking through, how do we create a culture? How do we surface if there is disagreement between and among board members? And we were talking at dinner last night, it's endemic. A lot of us are on boards with people with very different views, very different opinions on things, and our charter is to work together well despite all that. So that takes work, that takes understanding, and if we undermine that, we're undermining our own and our board's fiduciary responsibility. As hard as it is one of the things that we need to do, and we need to do well.
Yeah, Jane, I would come back to the report and say there's a section and a toolkit around kind of board performance evaluations, and maybe one thing to just add, that maybe Jane's example isn't the best. Once you do go through a structured process, the closing the loop feedback is vitally important, and done in a structured way and in a kind of thoughtful and candid way, are vitally important, because if we come back to a few other stats that are out there, most board members feel like many board members feel like there's at least one board member who shouldn't be on the board. The majority of CEOs and C-suite members believe there's either one or two members on the board who shouldn't be there. And the fact that we are not going through appropriate board performance reviews is a condition that exacerbates this challenge, that maybe the board is not, best composed for the challenges the company may be facing.
If you lose trust, if that trust is broken, is it realistic to expect that it can be rebuilt?
I think the answer to that, in my view, is it depends. And I think, we probably all
And
have...
what would be the steps that you could
we
go
all
through?
have great examples, right, of, okay, we had a disruption, we had a disagreement, we had misalignment, we had a blow-up, whatever you want to call it, that happened either in the boardroom or outside of the boardroom. So how do we get cooler heads to step back and go, okay, what happened and why, right? And then go through some level of mediation process to understand how we might be able to bring the parties back together again. And there are opportunities to do that, and there are situations where it works, and then there are situations where it just doesn't work, kind of like relationships in life. And then I think you have to get to the place where change needs to be made, and that needs to be done in a thoughtful, graceful, and timely fashion. But trust can be repaired, but I would say it's very difficult, especially when it becomes personal or emotional with folks.
In a situation I was involved with, we had board members that just didn't get along, and that manifested in the boardroom with pettiness, which if you take me out for a drink, I can tell you about, but not important for the story. What we did was we put those two board members together and had them work on a project together and report back to the board. So we forced them into a situation where they were either going to make it or break it, and then we could get to the second point of Wayne's decision and say, it's irrevocably broken, we've got to make a change here, or more hopefully, because each of those individuals had the skill sets, everything worked out for what we needed, and they went through the project together beautifully. It was hard after that to get them to not sit next to each other in the boardroom and to, be part of the board again. But there are things that you can do if you're intentional and meaning, and really work with the best intentions. So you have to come from a place of, are these board members trying to sabotage everybody? Like, is that their role here? Or do they really want to get the work done that we need to get done? So there are techniques that you can use, but yes. And I would also, bring it back, as the report does, to the trust between the board and the CEO. And again, looking at disclosure of bad news that may be beyond the CEO's immediate control to handle. So lots of that coming out at us now, whether it's, tariffs, Greenland, whatever. Stuff is happening with supply chains. Not all of it is within somebody's control. So does the board take a really prosecutorial view of that and go to demand, what are you going to do, what's going to happen? Or is it more questioning, how does this change our plans? What does good look like in a bad environment? How can we help you think through this best? And you can see just from the framing, nobody's comfortable with what's happening. But one framing is geared toward getting responses that are constructive and collaborative, and the other is really dangerous. So I flew down from New York. It was a really turbulent flight in a very small plane. And I thought, the pilot isn't responsible for the weather, but he is responsible for letting us know when the turbulence is coming. And I kind of think about that, about the CEO relationship either. They're not responsible for all the weather, but they are responsible for knowing it's out there and letting us know about it.
And Jane, I think there's an ad here, which is getting ahead of the game. We're never going to predict everything that could happen, right? But building a quality risk framework and walking the board through the potential risks that could occur, or scenario plans that say, if these do happen, here's what we keep, here's what we don't keep. actually starts the process before there's a crisis, so that when a crisis happens, it may not be exactly what we thought it was going to be, but we've worked the board through a framework of how we will address and deal with uncertainty to the downside.